I've been a filmmaker for over a decade, and through those years I've had an on and off relationship with a lot of different camera brands. But I've never seen a complete lineup of cameras that work together quite like this one. The Sony FX3, FX6, Burano, Venice. They're all different tools, but they're part of the same ecosystem. So today I want to talk about why this family of camera works, why a lot of productions are choosing to go with the Sony ecosystem right now, and why it might be a little bit dangerous for other camera brands. If you've been following this channel for a while, you know that efficiency is what I strive for on set. Sometimes we might need a big camera that's rigged up that works well with larger crews, and sometimes we may need a smaller camera that's easier to one-man band or be more discreet. And that's where the philosophy of the Sony design team is really standing out. They've created a lineup of cameras all the way from a crash camera to a cinema camera that share the same color science, similar codecs in some of the bodies, and through firmware updates, a unified user interface. These aren't just good cameras independently, they're a family of cameras that works really well together. Having this unified system of cameras is such a time saver and budget saver for a lot of production companies because you can almost copy and paste a grade from different cameras, maybe with a slight adjustment in magenta or hue shift. Of course, all these cameras have really good specs on their own, great dynamic range, codec options, etc., but the ability to copy and paste a grade from different cameras and match them quickly saves so much time and budget in post, which is why I think that the Sony family of cameras is rising to the top and a lot of different production companies are still choosing and asking to shoot on Sony. So if you don't know much about the FX3, if you've been sleeping under a rock or something, the FX3 is basically the A7S III but put into a body that's a little bit more friendly for productions with additional fans, quarter 20s, etc. But what's really cool and visionary about the FX3 is that before the FX3 there really wasn't a mirrorless body that was specifically designed and executed for video production. So the FX3 was really kind of a pioneer in this new space of small, highly capable crash cams. Before this camera, if you were using a mirrorless or DSLR, you'd be using the 5D, an A7S, etc. But Sony really kind of flipped the script, and I remember whenever it first came out, everybody was just kind of mocking it and laughing because it was essentially an A7S III put into a different body, but over time, the value of the FX3 has really increased and shown its value in very tangible ways on sets. I bought this camera about 4 years ago, and over those 4 years I've used it in a lot of different ways. Initially I bought it as a C camera or a gimbal camera to my dual FX6 cameras that I had at the time, but since then I've used it in a lot of other ways, including as a main A camera for smaller projects or even as a more discreet camera for more documentary style focused videos. But this camera continues to shine and improve as time goes on. Sony's been very good about updating the firmware and systems, and in fact we're going to get B-RAW coming this fall, which is a really cool upgrade, and it's nice to see Sony still improving and implementing new features into a camera like this. Recently, I've mainly been using this camera as a quick rig for solo work or a crash camera for more risky setups. This camera has really become a Swiss Army knife in a lot of my sets. This is a camera that retains a very good image and cuts perfectly with the Burano or Venice, but it's also a camera that can stand alone. It's a camera that I'm very used to and a lot of production companies are very used to. In fact, it's almost become a standard on a lot of different sets. But there is some compromises that you have whenever working with a camera like this, which is what makes you upgrade to some of the larger cameras. For example, the lack of I/O ports in this camera may make it less of a fit for some of the larger productions. It does have RAW out, but it doesn't have internal RAW recording like we see in the Venice, Venice 2, etc. So sometimes the image doesn't hold up quite as well, even though it cuts. The audio seems to clip a little bit faster, even though it's kind of the same spec. It doesn't seem to be quite as good as what we see in the FX6 and Burano, etc. And then lastly, it doesn't have internal ND, which is a very hot selling point for the next tier of Sony cameras. The FX6 is the FX3's bigger brother. It's got better I/O ports, better audio, better codecs with Sony's XAVC-I, and honestly, the FX6 is a perfect camera for a lot of different documentary, corporate, and verite shooting. I bought the FX6 right when it came out, and I loved that camera so much I bought a second FX6. The implementation of autofocus, good audio, SDI, HDMI, everything all into one smaller body that was around $6,000 was a very good selling point for me and a lot of my corporate and doc work. Fast forward 4 or 5 years and the FX6 has now become the B camera to my Burano. But on every set that I have the Burano shooting A camera, especially on interviews, the FX6 is there as B camera. Just like the other cameras in the lineup, the FX6 sharing the same color science as the Burano, and then from what I understand, it has the same ND system that the Burano has been a really good B camera. Especially for interviews, both cameras have beautiful skin tones, and essentially I'm copying and pasting my grade from the Burano to the FX6, which again saves time and budget in post. It shares the same sensor as the FX3, and I didn't mention it earlier, but essentially it has the same dual native ISO, which is what again has made the FX6 and FX3 very popular, both at 800 and 12,800, which has been a lifesaver on a lot of different sets, especially run and gun stuff. Sometimes 800 may not quite get me there, but if I put the camera at 12,800 then apply ND, the exposure index is perfect. So the FX6 really brings over everything that we love about the FX3, excluding the very tiny body, and puts it into a larger cinema style focused body, which has made it a very popular choice for a lot of different documentaries, TV shows, etc. In fact, I've shot spots for tourism companies that request the FX6 specifically, and then I've shot live TV stuff that requests the FX6 specific. So it's a camera that checks a lot of different boxes for a lot of different points in production. It's also kind of a Swiss Army knife in that way. But as with the FX3, it's also got some downsides. It doesn't include the IBIS like we saw in the FX3, which would have been a really nice addition. And the XLR ports are strangely mounted to the top handle. Nowhere in the body can you even input a 3.5 or any audio into the camera without the top handle, which I think is an interesting design choice. Which brings me to the Sony Burano. Now, I did a longer form video explaining why I bought this camera and what my decision process was like buying this camera. I deliberated on it for several months and rented a lot of different cameras and used a lot of different cameras and eventually landed on this camera. But essentially, in a nutshell, what's really cool about the Burano is it takes things that we love from the FX3, the FX6, and the Venice 2 and then puts it into a smaller body. Through my process of debating myself and trying to find my next cinema camera, I kept coming back to the thought that the Sony Burano was a camera that was built for working DPs. It's not a camera that just matches the FX3 and FX6, it's a camera that elevates them. It gives the DP an opportunity to have a fully rigged out, very reliable and solid A camera, while also being able to be stripped down and shoot solo style films. Essentially what the Burano does is it integrates the IBIS that we see in the FX3 that a lot of people know and love, the internal ND that we see in the Venice 2 and FX6, and then the 8.6K resolution that we're seeing in the Venice 2. And then the sensor itself has very good dynamic range. And one thing that's very popular and interesting about this camera is the integration of IBIS with internal ND. It's one of the first cinema cameras that we've seen that does that, and it executes it very well. Through my quest, I used the Burano on several different shoots before deciding to buy it. But one thing that I kept coming back to that I really loved is that the Burano is a good size. It's decently big and heavy for what it is, but it can be rigged for solo shooting, but it can also be rigged up large for larger crews and larger production shooting. I've had reliability issues with other camera brands over the last 10 years or so, but that's something that I've never had with Sony. In fact, my original A7S1 is still running. Now, that was another thing that really attracted me to the Burano. It didn't make me choose between quality and reliability. The Burano fires up every time and it's ready to go within a couple of seconds. So I think that that is the real win with the Sony Burano. It's a cinema camera that can scale with you. If you're shooting with a lean crew like we see a lot in the industry right now, it's manageable. And if you're shooting with a larger crew, it's definitely riggable and capable. The Burano itself obviously has some downsides and some shortfalls, and I cover that in my longer video, but that's why the Venice 2 exists. Overall, a lot of times we can get caught spec chasing, but for me right now it's coming down to trust. This is a camera that I trust on smaller jobs and my biggest jobs, and that's why it anchors the family. And if you put all of those together, I think that that's the power of this trio. Since I got the Burano, it's gone out on almost every job, whether it's a small corporate gig or it's a large commercial. This trio of cameras is really a powerful tool within itself. It's opened up the ability for me to have a fully rigged out, stable, reliable A camera while also having a small C camera that we can get really unique angles with. And at the end of the day, clients never ask which camera is which. I think the hidden value with these cameras is really speed and trust. At the end of the day, I don't want to babysit my gear. I don't want to show up on set and have to diagnose issues issues and solve different problems. I want to be able to show up with trust and confidence and focus on the story. And that's what this family of cameras is allowing productions to do. Now, like I said at the beginning, I've been a on and off user of Sony for the last decade or so, and I don't expect to be with Sony for the rest of my career. I bet we'll see another family of cameras pop up from a different camera brand, and in fact, they may be more powerful. But right now, I think Sony has it, and that's why a lot of productions are still flocking to Sony. Clients are requesting them, and teams are comfortable with them, but most importantly, Sony has solved some real-world challenges that a lot of filmmakers face. I'm Keaton Nye. I'm sharing my journey and what I've learned along the way. If you want to continue growing together, consider subscribing. This is just the beginning of the conversation.